You know that feeling when you're standing in the break room and you're microwaving something that you brought from home, and you just sort of look around and you see fluorescent lights and the hum of the microwave, and maybe a coworker is scrolling on their phone in silence, maybe someone else is eating quickly, and someone is watching the clock, and then you hear the microwave beep and you just think to yourself, wow, is this supposed to be my break? Is this the freedom part? Now, I know it might seem petty of me to complain about the lunch break. Now, I know what some of you are going to write in the comment section. Oh, what a crybaby. You should be grateful to even have a lunch break. And I totally get that response. I even know what it actually means. But tell you what, we'll get into that later in the video. What got me, it isn't the room itself. It's not the sad sandwich or the uncomfortable chairs or even the fact that the microwave smells like someone else's leftover fish. It's this feeling, this low-grade anxiety that sits in your chest even when you're supposedly off the clock. Like you're waiting for something, like you're not quite allowed to relax. And I've been trying to figure out why that moment stuck with me, Like why something so ordinary, so deeply normal, suddenly just felt off. And so here's something that I didn't expect to notice. So let me first describe what a typical lunch break looks like for me. It's usually around noon. Sometimes I forget it's lunch, but then I see people closing their computers and grabbing their bags. There is this weird moment of collective movement, like everyone's responding to an invisible signal. And I have exactly 30 minutes, not 35, not 25, it's exactly 30. And I can't leave the building. Well, technically I can, but there is this unspoken understanding that if you leave, you better be back on time. And if the place you're going is more than 5 minutes away, it starts to feel risky. And you start doing mental math. Can I make it to that coffee shop and back in 30 minutes? What if there is a line? What if I hit traffic? So most of the time, I just stay. I microwave something, and there is usually a stove in the corner, but I've never seen anyone use it. And sometimes I'll eat standing up or sitting in the break room. There are 6 chairs for a staff of 20, so it's sort of first come, first served. And sometimes I'll scroll on my phone. Sometimes I'll just stare at the wall because I'm too tired to do anything else. And sometimes, this is the part that I actually dread. A colleague starts talking with me, whether I want to or not. Now, as an introvert, I often prefer to eat lunch quietly without conversation. But you don't want to be rude, so you listen, you nod. You make that appropriate facial expression when they talk about their weekend or their kids or something that they saw on TV. And the whole time, there is this tiny part of your brain counting down. 27 minutes left, 23 minutes, 50 minutes, and then the 30 minutes are up and I go back. Now, here's what I've been noticing. During that 30 minutes, I'm not being paid. That time is technically mine, but I also can't really do what I want with it. I can't go home. I can't take a nap. I can't run errands that take longer than 15 minutes round trip. I can't even really disconnect because I'm still physically there, still in the building, still surrounded by the same people I work with. I'm just sort of suspended in limbo, waiting to go back. And the more I sat with this, the more I realized that I never questioned this arrangement, not once, until now. You see, it's just how things are. It's what everyone does. It's normal. And a friend of mine works at a warehouse. Same thing, 30 minutes, can't leave the facility. He eats in the break room with the same people every day, same routine, same feeling of being tethered by the clock. And another friend works from home, and even she feels it because, she closes her laptop, she makes lunch, eats it quickly, but then sits there for the remaining 10 minutes waiting. Not because she has to, but because that's the rhythm she's internalized, and it's everywhere. And this is where it stops making sense. We call it a break. We call it time off. And we act like it's this generous thing, this pause in the day where we get to be ourselves again. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like being on standby. It feels like I'm still at work, just not doing anything productive for them. Now, let me tell you about the day that this really clicked for me. I needed to go to the bank, and it was urgent, something about a payment that needed to be confirmed in person. And I thought, okay, I have 30 minutes. the bank is 10 minutes away. I can do this. So I went. I left the building feeling slightly rebellious, like I was getting away with something. And I got to the bank and I walked in and the line was longer than I expected. And I stood there watching, the clock on my phone, like 12:15, 12:20, 12:25. The line barely moved. And by the time I got to the teller, I had maybe 8 minutes left. And I rushed through the transaction. I ran back as quickly as I could, and I walked into the office at 12:37, 7 minutes late. Now, to be fair, nothing dramatic happened. Nobody yelled, but I could feel it, the shift in the air, the way my manager glanced at the clock when I walked in, the way a coworker would raise their eyebrows, the unspoken judgment. You know what I'm talking about. Now, I didn't get into trouble, but I felt like I failed some invisible test, like I misunderstood the terms of my freedom. And that's when I realized that this really isn't my time at all. If it were truly mine, I could extend it by 10 minutes if I needed to. I could leave and come back when I was ready. I could decide not to take it and leave work early. I could say, hey, I need 45 minutes today because I have an appointment, and that would be just fine. But I can't. The time is mine, but the rules are theirs. Oh, and by the way, if this kind of thinking resonates with you, consider subscribing. I make videos like this every week, breaking down the systems we're told not to question. Anyway, that day I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how I felt guilty for being 7 minutes late during my unpaid time, about how I apologized to no one in particular when I walked in, about how I spent the rest of the afternoon feeling like I owed someone something. And this is where the trap hides in plain sight. But here's what makes it even worse. You see, sometimes I'll be working on something, very focused, making progress, and then 12 o'clock comes, it's lunchtime. Now, I'm sitting in the break room, forced to eat first when every part of me wants to just finish the task. The break isn't a relief, it's anxiety. It's this weird, mandatory pause right when I need to keep moving. And I have to sit there, watching the clock, knowing the deadline is waiting, feeling the pressure build while I chew my sandwich in this strange, suspended state. And this is not a break. This is torture with better lighting. I couldn't let this go, so I started looking closer. And when you work somewhere, there is paid time and unpaid time. Paid time is when you're on the clock, when you're producing value, doing tasks, being productive. Unpaid time is everything else. And lunch falls into this weird category where it's unpaid, but you're still controlled by the clock. You're still required to be somewhere. You're still on their schedule. So here's what bothers me about that. If you're required to be somewhere at a specific time under someone else's rules, unable to leave freely, doesn't that sound like work? Even if you're not actively doing tasks, you're still constrained. You're still operating within their system. And I thought about truck drivers. If a truck driver had to wait at a loading dock for hours, that the time counts as paid labor, even though they're not driving, even though they're just sitting there, because they're required to be there. They can't leave. They're on standby. They're at the employer's disposal. And that's considered work. So why doesn't the same logic apply to lunch breaks? Now, I might be wrong about the legal specifics, but the principle bothers me because it sort of reveals something about how we draw these lines, about what counts as work and what doesn't. Now, this next part is kind of uncomfortable. You're not eating because you want to. You're eating because your job requires you to have energy. If you don't eat, you can't focus. You slow down, you make mistakes, your body stops functioning the way it needs to. Your blood sugar crashes and you get irritated. You become less productive. So in a way, lunch isn't a personal choice. It's maintenance. It's refueling so you can keep working. It's like if your car ran out of gas and your boss said, that's your responsibility. You need to fill up on your own time, but you're only driving the car because of work. You wouldn't need the gas if you weren't doing this job. And if you need to eat in order to do your job, shouldn't that be considered part of the job? And here's another thing that feels contradictory. Most offices provide free coffee, sometimes really good coffee, espresso machines, cold brew on tap, fancy single origin beans, whatever you want. They do this because coffee helps you work and keeps you alert, it keeps you productive. They understand that caffeine is fuel for the system that they're running, so they pay for it happily. But lunch, that the actual food your body needs to function, that's on you. I'm not saying that companies should provide free lunch. I'm just noticing the contradiction. Coffee is a business expense because it boosts productivity, but food is your personal responsibility. Even though both are fuel, both are necessary for you to do your job. And it's just such a strange line to draw. And I started wondering, what if you just didn't take a lunch break? What if you said, I'll work through lunch and I want to leave 30 minutes early instead? At most places, you can't do that. The lunch break isn't optional, it's mandatory. Your employer requires you to take it, not because they care about your well-being, but because labor laws require it. They have to give you that break, but they don't have to pay you for it. So you're required to stop working, you're required to stay nearby, you're required to come back on time, but it's framed as if they're doing you a favor. Now, here's what makes it all worse. If you work 8 hours a day with a 30-minute unpaid lunch, you're actually at work for 8.5 hours. If it's an hour lunch, you're there for 9 hours, but you're only being paid for 8 hours. Now, over the course of a year, and I did the math on this, if you take an hour-long lunch break every day, 5 days per week for 52 weeks, that's about 260 hours. 6 weeks of your life in break rooms for free. 6 weeks of sitting in uncomfortable chairs under fluorescent lights, eating, well, mediocre food, watching the clock, feeling like you should hurry up. And it's not just the lunch breaks, it's the commute too, 1 to 2 hours long, depending on how close you live, to get to your unpaid waiting time. I made a whole video about this last year because once you start seeing these invisible rules, you can't stop. How many more are there? How many other ways are we giving away our time and calling it normal? And the strange part is nobody talks about it because, well, it's normal. Now, I tried bringing this up once at dinner with some friends, and I said something like, isn't it weird that we're required to be at work for 9 hours, but we only get paid for 8? And they looked at me like I was being difficult, like I was complaining about something everyone just accepts. And one friend, I remember this, he said, yeah, but you need to eat anyway, which is true, but also not the point. Because I need to sleep too. I need to shower. I need to brush my teeth, but nobody expects me to do those things at work during unpaid time while remaining on site and available. The difference is control. When I sleep, I do it on my own schedule in my home for as long as I need or want to. When I take a lunch break, I do it on their schedule in their building for exactly the amount of time they allow. That's not the same thing. So I don't have a solution to any of this. I'm not trying to start a revolution or a union to change labor laws. I'm just trying to sit with what I'm noticing and see where it goes. But here's what's been shifting for me recently. You see, I've stopped calling it a break in my head. Now, I know that sounds small, but it actually made a difference because when I call it a break, I expect to feel rested. I expect to feel free. And when I don't, I end up feeling like I'm doing something wrong, like I'm not using my time correctly, like I should be enjoying it more. But if I just call it lunchtime or the middle part of the day that I don't get paid for, I don't carry that expectation anymore. It's just what it is, but it's not freedom. It's not rest. It's just a time between work blocks, the mandatory pause, and somehow naming it differently has made it feel less frustrating. And I've also started paying attention to how I feel during that time. Not in a judgmental way, just noticing. Sometimes I feel anxious, like I need to hurry up and get back, like I'm wasting time by sitting too long. Other times I just feel numbed, like I'm just going through the motions because that's what you do. And occasionally, very occasionally, I feel something close to peace. Usually when I'm eating something I actually like or when I manage to sit outside and the weather is nice, but mostly I just feel in between. Now, here's the part that kind of shook me. I used to feel guilty if I took the full 30 minutes. It's true. Like I should be eating faster, getting back sooner, proving I wasn't slacking. I would finish my lunch in 15 minutes, and then I would sit there for the remaining time, feeling uncomfortable, feeling like I should go back early to show I was a team player, to show I wasn't abusing the privilege. Privilege. But it's more than guilt. I feel depressed every single lunch break. And I'm not kidding. I'm not being overdramatic. There is this tightness in my chest, this sort of shallow breathing. And sometimes I have to remind myself to breathe. It just feels so wrong in every part of my body to be forced into this square, into this behavior that doesn't feel like me. And I look around in the lunchroom and I don't see it in others. People just adapt. They eat their lunch, they make their small talk, they check their phones, they seem fine. And I suppose I adapt too, but I'm actually screaming inside every lunch break. Nobody told me to feel this way. My manager never said, "You're taking too long for lunch." No one ever complained, but somehow I sort of internalized this idea that even my unpaid time should be optimized, that even my break should be efficient. And I've trained to monitor myself, to sort of police my own freedom, even in the tiny moments where I'm technically free. And I think I know where that training comes from. If you recall, we spent 12 years, sometimes more, in school, sitting in rows, raising our hands, waiting for permission to speak, to move, to use the bathroom, following instructions, learning that authority decides when you're allowed to exist freely. Now, by the time we got to the workplace, we don't even question it anymore. That's what really disturbed me when I saw it clearly. Not that my employer controls my lunch break, but that I learned to control it for them, that I internalized their rules so deeply that I enforce them on myself even when no one is watching. And I wonder how many other invisible rules I'm carrying around like that. Now, some days I take the full 30 minutes and I don't rush. I sit, I eat slowly, I stare out the window, I let my mind wander, and I don't check the clock every 3 minutes. And it feels rebellious, which is ridiculous. It shouldn't feel rebellious to use the time I'm technically allowed to use, but it does. Now, this actually varies. I've worked in different companies. I work as a consultant. Some companies have 1-hour lunches, and people there actually leave. They go to restaurants, they meet friends, they run errands, and nobody treats it like they're breaking the rules. And I remember talking to a coworker at one of those places, and she said something that, well, it sort of stuck with me, because she said, lunch isn't a break from work. It's just part of life. Work has to fit around that, not the other way around. And I couldn't get that out of my head because I know what it's like when you're not on someone else's schedule. You see, every Saturday, I work on my own business. Yes, I have my own business. I'm building YouTube videos, I'm editing, I'm writing scripts, and you know what? I don't punch out when it's lunchtime. I go when I feel hungry. Sometimes at 11, sometimes at 1 or 2, sometimes it's 50 minutes, sometimes it's 40 minutes. Sometimes I eat at my desk while I'm still thinking through a problem, and sometimes I go for a walk. I don't have a company deciding my free time, and that's the difference. And it's everything. And I remember this one day, I was at work and I got this message from the Swedish tax authority, and they needed more information on my tax report, and it had to be completed soon. Now, if this had happened, for a work assignment thing, I would have felt immediate anxiety, that pressure to drop everything and handle it now, that feeling of being controlled by someone else's deadline. But instead, I just thought, I'll do that on Saturday, on my terms. And I did, calmly, at home, when I was good and ready. And that is autonomy. When I'm working on my own business, I don't feel this constant low-grade anxiety. I don't feel like I need permission just to exist. I just work. And when I'm hungry, I eat. And when I'm tired, I rest. And nobody is watching the clock. And when I'm making YouTube videos, I'm 100% just me. That's the most authentic version of myself. It's a space where I can breathe and feel like myself. But when I'm at work, I'm just a robot. I'm just following instructions. So, let me give you an example. Sometimes my boss will say, "Oh, we have to fix this report, but don't fix anything yet. Wait until I tell you what to fix." And so I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, I guess I'll wait. I guess I'm too stupid to fix it myself. And that to me is no life. That's wage slavery. Because I need to be honest here. When I'm at work at my 9 to 5, I don't feel like me. I feel like I've stepped into a role, someone who doesn't think for himself, someone who waits for instructions and follows them, someone who apologizes for being 7 minutes late during his own unpaid time. And most people hate when I use that term, wage slavery. They think that I'm being dramatic. They think that I'm being ungrateful, but I use it to stir things up, to create tension, to force a conversation we're not supposed to have. And remember what I said in the beginning about how some of you would say that I should be grateful for my lunch break? That response, that's the system protecting itself. You see, it's easier to call someone a crybaby than to question whether the thing everyone does is actually okay. Because most people never even consider that they're rats in a wage slave system. It's a truth that would haunt most people, a truth that terrifies most people, so they don't look at it. They stay on automatic. They do what they're told. And when someone like me points it out, when someone says, "Hey, does this feel right to you?" the automatic response is to defend the system, to say, "You're lucky," to say, "Be grateful," to say, "Stop complaining," not because they actually believe it's great, but because the alternative, admitting that maybe we're all trapped in something we never questioned, is too disturbing to sit with. And I get that. We've been trained for 12 plus years to follow instructions, to wait for permission, to not question the system. But I can't do that anymore. I'm not saying I have it all figured out. I'm not saying that everyone should quit their job and start a business like me, but I am saying that I can't keep pretending that the current arrangement is okay, because it's not. I can't call it freedom because it doesn't feel free. So I work on my side business, not because I'm some entrepreneur guru, not because I think I'm going to get rich, but because what keeps me up at night sometimes is thinking how much of my life I've already wasted being a wage slave. And at least when I'm building something, even while I'm still trapped in a system, I feel like I'm deciding something, I feel like I have some control, some autonomy, even if it's just choosing when to eat lunch on a Saturday. Maybe that's the clearest sign that something is off. When using your own time feels like breaking the rules. I can't stop noticing it now. The way we've normalized this strange in-between time, the way we call it freedom when it doesn't really feel free, the way we're supposed to be grateful for something that, when you really look at it, is just unpaid waiting. It's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe the first step is just recognizing something that you've always accepted that doesn't quite sit right, that the story you've been told doesn't match what you're actually experiencing. Now, I don't know what comes after that. I don't know if anything changes. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'll still take my 30-minute lunch in the break room under fluorescent lights for the rest of my working life, but at least I see it for what it is. At least I won't pretend it's something it's not. And maybe there's power in just naming what's true and refusing to call it a gift when it feels like a leash. I'm still figuring this out, but at least I'm paying attention. As always, thank you for listening. Do me a favor and tap that like button to share your support. Subscribe if you're interested in more content like this. Until next time, stay hungry, relentless, and strong in your journey of escaping wage slavery. Bye.